Hi, I'm Ilara.
I knew something was wrong the moment I saw my invention being showcased on national television, without my name on it. There it was, the sleek prototype of the pulse band, a wearable biometric device I'd spent the last 4 years perfecting. The camera zoomed in on the glowing interface, and standing next to it, smiling like he'd split the atom himself, was my older brother, Jason. My heart didn't break. It cracked like ice under pressure, silent and dangerous. I stood frozen in the hallway of my university's engineering building, the light from the screen flickering over my face. The announcer praised him, a self-taught genius, bringing innovation to wearable tech, while my inbox filled with messages from confused classmates who knew the truth. I wasn't confused. I was furious. Jason and I hadn't spoken in months. The last time I'd seen him was the day he dropped by my tiny apartment under the pretense of catching up, only to pry into every detail of my final year project. I'd been flattered, then cautious, then dismissive. But he'd stayed just long enough to snap photos, ask just the right questions, and pretend like he cared. At the time, I didn't think he'd do something like this. He had always been the charming one, the one who smoothed things over with a laugh, who got away with everything from breaking mom's favorite vase to flunking his second year of college. He was the kind of person who made you feel crazy for getting upset, because how could someone so likable ever be cruel? But this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was theft, plain and simple. The pulse band was mine. Every line of code, every design schematic, every sleepless night spent debugging firmware, and every prototype soldered together with trembling hands and too much caffeine.
Mean it.
And yet there he was, accepting applause on a stage that should have been mine, speaking words I had written in my original pitch deck. The world might have believed him. I didn't. The betrayal wasn't what shocked me. It was how thorough he'd been. When I reached out to the startup incubator he claimed to have founded to develop the product, I was met with silence. My emails bounced. The number listed on the site rang forever. I sent a cease and desist letter that went unanswered. I dug deeper, and what I found chilled me. He hadn't just stolen my idea, he'd built a company around it. He'd raised venture capital using my blueprints, filed patents under his name, and hired a team. A real team. Real investors. Real money. It was surreal. It felt like being erased. But what he didn't know was that I'd never stopped documenting. Every file I created was time-stamped and saved. Every video I recorded of my work was archived. Every email to my professor, every version of the firmware, every note scribbled in my design notebook. I had it all. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to build something else entirely. Quietly. Precisely. And I would let the truth unravel him, thread by thread. My name is Ilara, and if I've learned one thing in my 24 years, it's that trust is a luxury I can't afford. I grew up in Jason's shadow. He was 3 years older, louder, and effortlessly magnetic. I was the quiet one, the fixer, the observer. He filled the room. I studied it. Our parents always assumed we were a team, Jason and Ilara, siblings who had each other's backs. But I had stopped believing that long ago. Still, I didn't think he'd go this far. I had shown him my work out of some naive hope that, for once, he'd be proud of me. I should have known better. I returned to my apartment that night with one goal: reclaim my invention. Not with confrontation, but with precision. I wasn't just going to expose him, I was going to build something better. If he had taken my version 1.0, I'd make a version 2.0 so groundbreaking, so irrefutable, that no one could deny its origin. I started pulling all my old documents together, organizing years of work, every note, every test, every breakthrough. I contacted my professor, Dr. Linden, who had supervised my project. He remembered everything and promised to support any legal claim I made. He even offered his own documentation, which showed my work predated Jason's pitch by at least a year. I filed an intellectual property complaint. I reached out to a tech journalist I trusted. I hired a lawyer who specialized in patent disputes. But I didn't stop there. I got to work improving the pulse band. I added features Jason didn't even know were possible: real-time hydration monitoring, adaptive thermal feedback, and a new, sleeker design with a proprietary charging mechanism. My new version was smarter, more efficient, and impossible to replicate without the core source code I had kept locked away. The journalist got back to me in a week. She wanted an interview, a deep dive into my side of the story. I gave it to her off the record.
For now.
She confirmed what I already suspected. Jason's company, ReapTech, had launched with venture funding based on falsified origin claims. Their prototype was buggy, barely functioning, and their investors were starting to get nervous. Apparently, their beta testers had reported overheating and inconsistent biometric readings. Of course they had. Jason had copied the exterior, not the heart. He didn't understand the architecture. He didn't even understand the code. He just knew how to sell the dream. But dreams collapse when the scaffolding is rotten. 3 weeks later, the story broke. Not mine yet. A report surfaced from a ReapTech whistleblower detailing internal dysfunction and mismanagement. The story went viral. Jason went silent. I waited. I watched the numbers dip. I watched the investors back away. And then, I sent a polite, evidence-heavy email to every board member, complete with date-stamped designs, code logs, and the truth. I didn't need to threaten. I just had to show them who had built their empire on sand. I got a response within 48 hours. One of the board members, an older woman named Ms. Chan, requested a meeting. She had questions. She wanted to see my lab, my process, my proof. I met her in person, walked her through the latest version of the pulse band, and watched her eyes widen as the biometric readings updated in real time with flawless accuracy. She stayed for 2 hours, asked every question imaginable, and left with a flash drive full of my documentation. 2 days later, Jason was removed as CEO. But this isn't the end of the story. Not even close. They offered me a position, Chief Technical Officer. A fat salary, an apology, and a PR package that made it sound like I had joined forces with ReapTech to take the product to the next level. I smiled, thanked them, and declined. Because I wasn't joining a company built on my stolen idea. I was building something new, something better, something mine.
And Jason?
He didn't just lose his job. He lost his leverage. The investors cut him out entirely. No golden parachute.
No soft exit.
His reputation took a hit he couldn't spin. The last I heard, he was working at one of ReapTech's distribution warehouses in upstate New York, sorting inventory and watching from the sidelines as the device he tried to steal finally reached the market, under my name. But revenge, I've learned, isn't just about winning. It's about walking back into the space they tried to erase you from and taking up every inch of it. I wasn't done yet. The pulse band was only the beginning. And Jason? He still didn't understand just how many moves ahead I was playing. He thought the game was over. He hadn't even seen the board. The first time I saw Jason again after everything fell apart, he looked nothing like the confident man on the magazine cover. Gone was the tailored suit, the toothy smile, the arrogant glint in his eye. In its place was a warehouse uniform, worn-out sneakers, and a silence that clung to him like dust. He didn't see me at first. I was standing in the mezzanine above the ReapTech warehouse floor during a routine audit visit, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 members of my newly formed legal team. The company that had stolen my work was now required, by court order, to license my technology. I owned the pulse band patent. They paid me a hefty royalty on every single unit. They had no choice. And Jason? He was part of the compliance settlement. He had signed away everything in a desperate attempt to avoid criminal prosecution. I watched him from above, sorting boxes, scanning inventory with a scanner gun, his shoulders hunched like the weight of it all had finally landed. For a second, I felt something close to pity, but it passed quickly. Because a month earlier, I had discovered something that burned away any remaining trace of sympathy. Jason hadn't just stolen my work. He had tried to erase me from it completely. While combing through old emails and legal documents, my lawyer found an altered grant proposal submitted under Jason's name, but it was originally mine. Word for word, graph for graph, even the typos matched. It had been forged months before the pulse band ever hit the press. He planned this longer than I'd thought. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment betrayal. It was a calculated, slow kill. I remembered the day I showed him the pulse band for the first time, how he smiled and said I had something special. He wasn't impressed. He was casing the joint. That discovery led me to another. The journalist I had worked with called to say she'd received an anonymous message from someone claiming to be an ex-employee of Tech. The message hinted that Jason had been working with an offshore investor who funneled funds through shell companies, effectively laundering money through the product launch. The scandal hadn't just been personal, it had been criminal. I sent the lead to Emerson, my attorney, and she traced the web within days. Everything pointed to one name: Aria Systems, a shadowy shell registered in the Caymans. It had dumped money into Tech right before Jason's public pitch, and then vanished after his firing. And there was only one person arrogant enough to think he could make something like that disappear: Jason. With new evidence in hand, I prepared a civil fraud case. This time, not just against Jason but also against every executive who had signed off on the forged grants and the shell-funded contracts. Tech tried to settle quietly. They offered me full ownership of the PulseBand division. They'd spin it off under a new name and let me run it independently. It was everything I wanted, but I didn't say yes. Not yet. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted Jason to hear my name whispered in every boardroom as the one woman who dismantled the company they built on lies. Meanwhile, I got to work on my next project, NovaLens, a smart eyewear system that used neural signal detection to interface directly with cognitive responses. Think glasses that respond to your thoughts. It was ambitious, dangerous, and exactly the kind of leap that would make the PulseBand look like a toy. I wasn't just building products anymore. I was building an empire, one calculated move at a time. But I made sure to keep it quiet. No public demos. No press releases. Not until it was too late to steal. The only problem was that someone already knew. I came home one night to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, nothing broken. But someone had been there. I checked my server logs. Someone had attempted to access my backup drive using a remote IP based in Singapore. The files were encrypted, so they got nothing, but it was a message. A warning. Jason wasn't done. Or someone else was helping him. The next day, a package arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a broken pulse band, shattered like it had been stepped on deliberately, and a single piece of paper. You don't get to win this easy. That's when I knew he had snapped. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about control.
Power. Pride.
He had lost everything and still couldn't accept it. I filed a restraining order and increased my personal security. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not until he tried again. And he would. Because Jason was too arrogant to stay in the shadows. He proved me right a week later. I was at a tech conference in Berlin, demoing a closed prototype of NovaLens to a select group of potential investors. The presentation was airtight. The response was electric. And then, during the Q&A, a man in the back stood up and asked about the ethical implications of using stolen neural mapping research. The room went silent. I looked straight at him and knew. It was Jason. Cleaned up, in a suit again, trying to look legitimate. I didn't flinch. I calmly answered the question, corrected the accusation, and cited my research dates, all publicly documented and verified. Then I turned it on him. I asked him to identify himself. He hesitated, and that's when security escorted him out. But the damage was done. Whispers spread. Some attendees got nervous. Investors started asking for more documentation. Doubt was planted. It didn't bloom, but it seeded. Back in the hotel room that night, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No name. Just one line written on the outside. What if I told you you were never the target? Inside was a flash drive. Against every instinct, I plugged it into an air-gapped computer. It contained surveillance footage from months ago, Jason speaking with someone I recognized. A former investor. But not just any investor. He was one of the original backers of NovaLens, someone who had turned me down last year after a strange and sudden shift in interest. The video showed them discussing asset reallocation and repurposing intellectual capital. It wasn't just Jason anymore. He had partners. And they were coming for Novalens. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I contacted Emerson and gave her everything. We put out NDAs, restricted access, locked everything down. Then, I played offense. I released a controlled leak to the tech press. Novalens was going into clinical trials with a full security audit, and I welcomed third-party scrutiny. It was a trap. If Jason or his allies made a move, it would be on record. And they did. An anonymous group filed a patent infringement claim the next day. I traced the claim through a shell corp in Luxembourg, back to the same investor in the video. And behind him, Jason. That gave us everything we needed. Emerson filed a federal case for IP theft and corporate espionage. The judge issued a temporary freeze on Jason's financial accounts and subpoenaed the shell companies. Meanwhile, the story exploded online. The girl who had her invention stolen was now building tech the same people were trying to steal again. Sympathy turned into support. Crowdfunding surged. My inbox filled with messages from women in STEM, engineers, and founders who had been dismissed, minimized, or sabotaged. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a symbol. And Jason? The warehouse fired him the day after the story broke. I didn't do it. ReapTech did. They claimed he had violated internal policy and risked investor relations. Which, ironically, he had. I heard he tried applying for jobs under a different name. But no one was hiring. Not with his face on the front page of every tech ethics blog in the country. The Novalens trial succeeded. We launched the first public demo 6 months later. It was flawless. Thought-controlled interfaces. Real-time attention metrics. A new way to interact with technology. I stood on stage in a navy blue suit, not a lab coat, not hiding behind a screen. I was the face of the product, the voice, the owner. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the cameras turned off, I found a note in my dressing room. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Jason, congratulations. You win. Just remember, if I hadn't pushed you, you'd still be tinkering in the dark. There was no apology. No remorse. Just his usual twisted need to claim credit. Even in defeat. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because the next morning, Novalens was trending globally. We had signed a licensing deal with a major health provider. We were in talks with the Department of Education. The product was already bigger than Jason could comprehend. And he was left with nothing but the sound of my name, rising above his, every time someone spoke about the future of cognitive tech. He once told me I didn't have the guts to lead. He was wrong. I didn't lack the guts. I lacked the opportunity. But when someone tries to destroy your foundation, you either crumble or you rebuild higher. Stronger. Unshakable. He thought he was taking credit. He didn't realize he was lighting a fire. And now he works in the warehouse my invention built. Success tasted nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't champagne at a rooftop party or applause echoing from a stage. It was silence. The kind that settles when the war ends and there's no one left to fight. Novalens had launched, and with it, I had earned not just credibility, but dominance in the field. But beneath the headlines, the congratulations, the offers to speak at conferences and teach masterclasses, there was a growing hollowness I couldn't name. I had gotten everything I wanted. And yet, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with the quiet. Maybe because I knew, in some part of me, that the game wasn't over. Not really. It started with the email. Subject line. You were right about ARIA systems. The sender was unknown. No name, no signature, just a Proton Mail account and a single message. Check the Cayman records again. Look deeper. The shell company wasn't Jason's idea. My stomach dropped. I forwarded the email to Emerson. Within hours, she was already pulling updated records from the firm we'd used during the initial case. New filings had emerged. Different ownership structures. Someone had buried the trail even deeper. But they hadn't done it well enough. The final breadcrumb was buried inside a digital signature, a pattern I recognized but couldn't believe. It was my father's. I hadn't spoken to him in over 2 years. Not since he sent a vague email during the ReapTech lawsuit claiming he had No idea Jason had done something so serious. I hadn't replied then. I didn't even trust myself to write back without saying things I'd regret. Our relationship had always been like walking on glass. He'd been distant when I was young, present only in the logistical sense, schedules, bills, brief praises when grades were good. But emotionally, he belonged to Jason. He believed in Jason, in his potential, in the image he projected. And now, I had confirmation that he didn't just believe in him. He'd financed him. Aria Systems wasn't Jason's shell. It was Dad's. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I went very still. And then I picked up the phone and called Emerson. Within a week, we had enough evidence to open a new civil case, one that included both Jason and my father under joint fraud. And this time, it wasn't just about intellectual property. It was about conspiracy, tax evasion, illegally funneled investment capital. The stakes had escalated. And with them, so had the consequences. The legal documents went out in sealed envelopes. One to Jason's last known address. One to Dad's business office downtown. I expected silence. What I got was chaos. 3 days after the envelopes were delivered, a black car pulled up in front of my office. Inside was my father. He looked older than I remembered. His hair grayer, his eyes dimmer, as if the secrets he carried had finally begun to eat him from the inside.
I didn't invite him in.
I met him on the curb.
He didn't waste time. It wasn't what you think, he said, his voice strained.
I didn't do it for Jason. I said nothing. I did it because I believed in the product. In you. My laugh was sharp, humorless. Then why bury my name? Why route it through offshore accounts? Why fund Jason instead of me? He looked away. Because no one invests in girls with no business experience and a grudge against their brother. And they invest in liars? He flinched. I thought I could manage it. I thought if I gave Jason the capital, he could front the idea, get it off the ground, and then we'd loop you in. Smooth the edges. You were going to clean up the theft later. After it made money. He didn't answer. I was never supposed to know, was I? He shook his head. We didn't think it would get this far. That was the final cut. Not just that they betrayed me, but that they underestimated me. That they thought I would accept being sidelined as long as the checks came in, and the nameplate on the office door said, Chief Technical Officer. They had always mistaken my silence for weakness. But I wasn't silent anymore. I told him to leave. Told him not to contact me again. Told him the next time we spoke would be in court. He left without a word. Later that night, Emerson called. The forensic accountant we'd hired to look into Aria Systems had found something new, a slush fund.
Millions.
Tied to other stolen projects. Other innovators like me, young, under-resourced, overlooked, whose ideas had been quietly repackaged and launched under Reaptecha's false startup spin-offs. It was bigger than I thought. Jason and my father weren't just thieves. They were part of a pipeline that had exploited brilliance and buried the names of those behind it. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I went public. I gave an exclusive interview to the same journalist who'd broken the first story. I named names. I showed evidence. I provided receipts. The world listened. Social media exploded. Lawsuits followed. Other victims came forward. A class action began to form. The Department of Justice took notice. My father's company went into immediate damage control. Jason vanished from public view. I didn't care where he went. Because I knew the system was closing in. What I didn't expect was the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope. Handwritten.
No signature.
Just 6 words. Warehouse security footage. You need to see. Inside was a flash drive. I loaded it alone. The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed Jason late one night in the Reaptech warehouse. Moving boxes. And then opening one. Removing a prototype. My prototype. Nova lens. He looked into the camera, no, not at the camera, into the lens itself. Like he knew it was watching. And then he said one word. Checkmate. The feed cut. I sat there for a long time, cold sinking into my bones. Because it meant he still had access. Somewhere, somehow, he had gotten his hands on the new design. The code was encrypted, protected by biometric verification.
But still, he was trying.
He hadn't given up. He was going to make one final move. Emerson reacted instantly. She activated a full audit. We traced the stolen prototype to a lab in Eastern Europe, confirmed by shipping logs under a different name. Jason's fingerprints were everywhere. But this time we were ready. A sting operation. A full data trap built into the device's firmware. Anyone who tried to boot it without the right credentials would trigger an automatic location ping and software wipe. We tracked the signal. A rented co-working lab in Prague. Local authorities raided the space within hours. Jason wasn't there, but someone else was. A woman in her 40s. A former ReapTech employee. She had taken the fall for Jason, but the evidence made it clear who was really pulling the strings. Her laptop held everything. Communications. Blueprints. Plans to reverse engineer Novolens and sell it on the black market. And buried in her email was a draft message, set to send automatically if she didn't log in within 72 hours. The message was addressed to me. And it said only this: he's not working alone. Look at your board. That was the moment I realized the rot wasn't just external. It was internal. I had taken control of the company, yes. But I hadn't gutted it. I had kept the structure, the staff, the board. And now I understood what the silence really meant. They were waiting for me to get comfortable,
To slip.
to hand over the next big thing without checking the foundation. But this time I was ready. And I had no intention of slipping. I didn't sleep for the next 3 nights. The words burned in my brain. Look at your board. I went over every meeting, every vote, every innocuous suggestion from the boardroom in hindsight, combing through for signs I'd missed. I saw them now. Suggestions cloaked in encouragement, pressure disguised as guidance. Push timelines. Helpful referrals for contractors. Even the delays in security upgrades I had demanded weeks earlier. It had all been strategic. They weren't watching me, they were guiding me, like a pawn across the board. Emerson launched a private internal investigation, something even the board didn't know about. We pulled financial records, vendor logs, security clearance changes, even old footage. I assigned my most trusted engineers to review the Novolens source code for any signs of tampering or backdoor access. Within 72 hours, we had a name.
Dr. Alan Monroe.
Board member. Former biotech executive. Polished, respected, and now deeply compromised. He'd been in contact with the same foreign labs Jason had worked through. Email aliases. Encrypted attachments. Quiet wire transfers that bypassed our internal system entirely. But Alan wasn't working alone. There were 2 others. Jeanette Cray, the softly spoken investment liaison who'd always understood my vision, and Hiram Blass, who rarely said anything in meetings but always voted in favor of more scalable solutions. Together, they formed a quiet coup. They hadn't moved on Novolens because they'd been waiting for my next invention. The prototype I hadn't told anyone about. The one I had been working on in a private lab, under a shell company, using off-grid power and a rotating team of freelancers sworn to secrecy. It was called Vera, Voice-Enabled Reactive Algorithm. An AI interface designed to learn emotional tone and environmental stress in real time, a leap beyond biometrics, beyond cognition. Vera didn't just respond to input. It predicted it, anticipated human need before the user even knew what they were feeling. It was built not for novelty, but for healthcare, trauma recovery, mental wellness. It was the kind of tech that would reshape the world. And somehow they knew about it. That's when I understood. The leak wasn't coming from a board member. It was coming from someone closer. Emerson reviewed access logs. Only 5 people had clearance to the encrypted vault where Vera's framework was stored. Myself, Emerson, 2 engineers I trusted completely, and my assistant, Sienna. I didn't want to believe it. Sienna had been with me since before ReapTech fell. She'd worked late nights, screened calls, managed my chaos with quiet, loyal grace. But loyalty has layers. When Emerson confronted her with the logs, Sienna didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just asked for a lawyer. She admitted everything. Jason had approached her nearly a year ago. promised her equity, promised her she'd never be overlooked again. He fed her the same lines he used to feed me. How brilliant she was, how invisible she'd become. And then he used her. Had her plant microphones, copy files, delay messages, redirect investors. Sheep in the shadow inside my firewall, and I hadn't seen it. Because she knew my schedule, my passwords, my trust. I had her arrested. It made the press. People were shocked. I wasn't. Not anymore. The board scrambled. Monroe, Cray, and Blast denied involvement. Claimed ignorance. Claimed Sienna had acted alone. But Emerson had built an ironclad case. She presented it at the next closed-door session, laying out every timeline, every dollar, every false document. She told them if they didn't resign quietly, we'd take it public. They resigned the next day. And still, I didn't feel closure. Because Jason was still out there. He hadn't surfaced in months. No official travel. No credit card activity. No sign. But I knew him. He was watching. Waiting for the fallout. For my guard to lower. For one more opportunity to sink the knife in deeper. But I was done waiting. So, I set a trap. We staged a leak. A fabricated pitch deck for Vera version 2, filled with fake specs, false algorithms, and a signature flaw buried in the neural net. Something that looked like a minor oversight but would cause the system to overcorrect and crash after 10 hours of use. We put the leak where we knew Jason's allies would find it, on a drive we forgot to secure at a tech showcase, in the hands of a freelancer we knew had ties to Jason's old circle. And then we waited. For weeks later, an independent European lab announced a breakthrough emotional AI system. They called it Project Eve. The specs were nearly identical to our bait. The crash happened within 3 days of launch. Their backers pulled out. The lab issued a statement blaming a rogue developer. No one mentioned Jason. But I knew. And so did Emerson. We smiled as we filed the final cease and desist. Jason didn't send another message. He didn't need to. We had silenced him in the only language he truly spoke, humiliation. And with that, I turned back to Vera. The real version. The one still in testing, still learning. We launched it 6 months later in a partnership with 3 major hospitals, a PTSD recovery program, and a trauma-informed school system. The early results were better than we hoped. Vera wasn't just responding, it was adapting. Lives were changing. Not with spectacle, but with consistency. And one day, after another long day at the office, I found a letter on my desk. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of paper. From Jason. The handwriting was shaky. Rushed. But I recognized it instantly. He didn't apologize. Instead, he wrote, "You always wanted to build something that mattered. I wanted to build something that made me matter. I guess we both got what we wanted." And at the bottom, in smaller letters, "I work in the shipping dock now. Watching them load your boxes. I think about all the wrong turns. I hope one day, you'll think of me not as the thief, but as the reason you kept climbing." I didn't cry. I didn't forgive. But I did feel something shift. Maybe he was right. Maybe the shadow had made the light feel more earned. Maybe I had climbed harder, because someone tried to knock me off the ladder. But I didn't build my future because of him. I built it despite him. And that's a different kind of power entirely. The official recognition came quietly, an email from the National Science Board notifying me that I'd been nominated for the Innovation Impact Medal. I stared at the screen for a long time, the cursor blinking beside the words, "Accept nomination," like it was waiting for permission to change everything. I accepted, of course, not because I needed validation, but because I'd finally earned the right to stop hiding behind someone else's shadow. The night before the award ceremony, I visited the warehouse. Not officially. Not with fanfare. I walked in through the employee entrance with a visitor badge, dressed in a plain coat and scarf, hair tied back. I wanted to see it. The place where the boxes were stacked. The boxes that carried my name. Where workers scanned, lifted, packed, and shipped something I had built. Something that had once been stolen and now existed because I fought to reclaim it. And I saw him. Jason was there, in a faded polo, his employee tag clipped loosely to his collar. He was thinner than before, his movements slower. He didn't see me at first. He was lifting a crate, then pausing to adjust a label. Something about the image should have felt triumphant. But it didn't. It felt final. Like the last page of a chapter one didn't want to reread. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. He turned, as if sensing me, and our eyes locked. Just for a second. Then I nodded. Not out of forgiveness or pity. Just acknowledgement. The war was over. He nodded back. And that was it. The award ceremony was broadcast live. My name was called. I walked on stage to polite applause, cameras flashing, the silence between my heels, and the podium thick with memories. I thought of the Pulse Band, of Nova Lens, of Vera, of Sienna's betrayal, my father's cold excuses, the boardroom traitors. I thought of every time someone told me I was too emotional, too intense, too driven, as if my passion was a defect. I didn't mention Jason in my speech. I spoke about resilience, about what it means to be underestimated, about how building technology isn't just about code, it's about defending it, nurturing it, protecting it from the ones who only know how to steal. I said that invention isn't just born in genius, it's born in defiance. I said the future belongs to the ones who never stop building, even when the floor crumbles under them. They stood when I finished. But that wasn't the moment that changed everything. That came a month later. A reporter from an independent tech blog reached out. She said she had found something I'd want to see. An audio file. Buried in the metadata of a corrupted project folder recovered from the failed lab where Jason's team tried to reverse engineer Vera. The file had been recorded 2 years ago. The voice on the tape was Jason's. He was talking to someone I didn't recognize. He said, "She'll win, you know. Alara. I've thrown everything at her. She'll still win. Because she doesn't just want credit. She wants to build something that outlasts us both. And that kind of ambition, you can't fake that. You can't steal it. You either have it or you don't." The reporter asked if I wanted her to publish it. I said no. Some truths don't need an audience. Some victories are private. The following week, I finally opened the small box that had arrived from my father after he disappeared from public life. Inside was a photo of us from years ago, me at 12, holding up a science fair trophy. Jason standing beside me. My father's arms around both our shoulders. The kind of picture that tells the story families like to pretend is real. Behind it, a handwritten note. "You built the future." I just never had the courage to admit it.
No palerí.
But an ending. I stored it away, not because I needed it, but because some pieces of the past belong in a drawer, not the trash. Vera went on to be licensed by dozens of mental health organizations, schools, and clinics. It didn't make me the richest person in tech. But it made me the one with the longest waiting list of partnerships. Not because the product was flashy, but because it worked.
It helped people. Quietly. Consistently.
Just like I always wanted to. And I never stopped building. I developed a mentorship program for women in STEM, funded anonymously, designed to protect their patents, elevate their research, and ensure that no one could do to them what had been done to me. We didn't just teach them how to invent. We taught them how to defend what they built, how to document everything, how to write contracts that couldn't be twisted, how to set up legal shields before they even launched. One of the first girls in the program built a prototype for an auditory learning device. She asked me if I thought her brother would try to steal it. I told her, if he does, make sure he doesn't get past version 1. She smiled. She understood. One day, I walked through a trade show filled with bright minds and beautiful machines. I saw my tech in the corner of multiple booths, modified, licensed, reimagined. Not stolen. Built upon. Credited. My name tucked into white papers, etched into contributor plaques. I wasn't just a brand. I had become a blueprint. On the flight home, I looked out the window and thought of my grandmother's favorite saying. You can grow in the shade, but only if you stop trying to convince the tree to move. Jason had been the tree, and I had grown anyway. Back in my apartment, I finally replaced the last piece of art on the wall, an empty frame that had hung there for years. I slid in a photo of the pulse band's original prototype. Next to it, I placed the acceptance letter from the National Science Board, folded neatly. And on the table beneath, a single warehouse manifest. The one with Jason's name at the bottom of the checklist, next to a scrawled signature and a line that said, "Verified, shipment of Vera, 03 complete." He hadn't signed as a brother. Or as a founder. Just as a worker doing his job. And that was enough. Because in the end, justice didn't come with screaming or slamming doors. It came in documents. In patents. In silence. In systems that worked. In reputations restored. In small, quiet moments where no one could take away what was already written in the foundation. My name. My work. My legacy. Not stolen, but earned. And no matter what warehouse floor he stood on, no matter what he told himself to sleep at night, Jason could never undo that. I didn't build to destroy him. I built to outlast him.
And I did.
Because some people chase the spotlight, but some of us, we become the infrastructure.